Welcome to Small Town Times. Today we have artist Mark Anthony Carmichael here. I'm really glad to have you in. I know
Thank you.
you've had a very interesting life. You've faced some challenges in life. You have some health challenges that you go through, but you've come out of it, and you're a compassionate artist that helps others. And so I'm very
I try.
impressed. Yeah.
I try.
So thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Give me a little snapshot about your life.
Okay, so growing up, I grew up in a fairly middle class, old school family from North Bay here, Carmichael's, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had that upbringing, but I went off the beaten path. I had some childhood traumas, and that led me into a life of crime and drugs and addictions and homelessness, right? So I spent a good part of my young adult life homeless and addicted, in and out of jail, in and off the streets, nothing really stable, nothing really concrete. And I thought that this would be the trajectory of my life. When you're in that cycle, that is the only cycle, and that's the trajectory of your life, right? Unfortunately, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2000, hence the mask, right? It's an autoimmune disorder.
Yep.
So I don't take any chances. If it helps, it helps. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But I don't take any chances, right? So because of my diagnosis with MS, I had to reevaluate my whole lifestyle and how very quickly that lifestyle would kill me. So I stepped back from the drugs and the crime and that whole lifestyle, and that was a big change, a complete 360 change in my life. So then, following the doctor's orders, you take the prescriptions that they give you, you do what they tell you to do. But for me, my MS symptoms were more manageable than the side effects from the prescriptions that they were giving me, right? So the prescriptions that they were giving me were making me increasingly sick. And their prognosis was that I would be in a wheelchair by 2005 and likely dead by 2010. And had I continued their trajectory, that would have been very true. I was fortunate, very fortunate, in that I was doing some home renovations for extra money at the time. This would be the early, mid-2000s. And I was very fortunate that the woman that I was working for had suffered a traumatic brain injury. And miraculously, her brain was growing back. And the doctors really didn't know how or why, other than to explain neuroplasticity, right? So she had this doctor, Dr. Clausen, coming once a week to interview her, to take notes, to study her. So I would take my coffee breaks at opportune times and pick his brain, right? What can I do about, this neuroplasticity seemed kind of relevant to my life. Maybe this is an autoimmune disorder. It's a neurological disorder. Perhaps this could help me, right? So through conversations with him, I'm picking the brain of Dr. Clausen about neuroplasticity and how this would help me. And some of the best advice that he gave me was if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So with my fine motor skills, find something to do that's going to train my hands, right? Because this was one of my biggest symptoms was tremors, right? And loss of vision and like Bell's palsy symptoms, partial paralysis of the face and partial paralysis of the arms and that, right? So this was a really big concern for me because at the time I did home renos. You can't be losing grip on things, right? And the vibration from machineries would numb out my hands, and I'd drop things, and I was just no good, right? So what he told me was find something to do that when you lose cognitive recognition of time, whether it's reading, whether it's painting, for me it's painting, anything where you lose cognitive recognition of time, which means that, what you thought was 20 minutes, you look at the time and it's 2 hours has gone by, right? Anything that you focus that intently on, your brain can't focus on anything else, right? And that includes pain, that includes discomforts, that includes hormonal responses, right? So when you're in that time frame, right, your body resets back to factory settings, right? And it allows your body to heal, right? The same as if you were sleeping, right? Your body only regenerates and sleeps when you're sleeping, but that's not true. Your body also regenerates when you lose this cognitive ability of time. It's not as good of a regeneration, but, right? You also, when you're learning new things, you're creating new neural pathways. And I like to think of it as when you walk through a field of grass from your house to your, when you walk through a field of grass from your house to, say, the shed, you walk down that pathway, you beat a pathway through the grass, right? The next time you go, you're more apt to take that same pathway, right? But by learning different things, you're taking different pathways, right? And one of those might be an easier way, right? But you wouldn't know that if you just continue on that same neural pathway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the same thing holds true with your brain. You can retrain your brain by creating these new neural pathways. You can, and it what it is damaged circuitry, right? And you're creating new circuitry that allows that damaged circuitry to sometimes hijack their way along it, right? So with me, it was hand tremors. So I started painting. I'd always had an interest in art. I'd always drawn and doodled and sketched and all of that. And I had some basic formal training from my grandmother growing up. So I knew the fundamentals of perspective and composition and things like that, right? So I thought, well, this is something that, would keep my hands busy and gives me a hobby, something to do, right? So I tried it, and it worked. It worked like a charm. It worked so well that I have to paint every single day when I get up in the morning. And a lot of it, see, the beauty of that is not everyone has to see it. So if it's something that I don't like, you'll just never ever see it, right? But if it is something that turns out fantastic, well, hey, great, right? I can show the rest of the world, but I'm not producing something to produce a masterpiece. If that happens, great. But I'm doing it as a form of therapy, right? So after a while, this form of therapy started to clutter up the house because there's just, you paint every day.
The canvases pile up.
They're going to pile up, right? So during this time, I had time to reflect. Another great therapy of art is it allows you expression. And a big problem in the world today is people have lost the ability to express themselves, and they have lost the ability to understand others' expression and just how fundamental that is. Um, so during this time, I was able to evaluate and look at my past and look at the damage and harm I had done my community. During those years of criminality, of addiction.
Do you mind me asking what kind of criminality, what kind of things were you doing that were on the other side of the law?
Break and enters.
Right.
Mostly petty crimes. You steal. You steal anything and everything that will pay for your addiction.
Much like what people are complaining about in the most recent years, where it seems like there's a huge spike in addiction and homelessness, and that's going on in North Bay right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's driven by desperation, and that desperation is fed by addiction. Plain and simple. It's choices, yes. It's circumstance, yes. But at the end of the day, it's choice.
And basically, you choose me and my need for a substance over anybody else's rights or property, and that you don't care.
No, you don't
have
care.
You're caring for yourself in a real destructive way, kind of thing. Yeah,
well, absolutely. But there's also a justification mindset that comes along with it. Okay. Because how else would you live with yourself?
Right.
Right. So we come up with all of these justifications on why it's okay, why this is justified, why, I got the terrible end of the stick. It's society's fault. It's the city's fault. It's everybody with a decent job's fault. But it's definitely not mine.
They have, and I have not, and I want.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And it's not even that you want it. What you want is the drugs that you're addicted to. And this is just a means to an end. It is strictly a means to an end. And there is no other thought. There is no other thought.
Yeah.
Right.
You want to stop thinking, really.
And well, exactly. And this is why trauma feeds this, right? Those traumas that are suffered in childhood or young adolescence or even self-inflicted traumas due to the circumstance of the situation. Once you're into that cycle, it's a very traumatic experience. Being homeless is traumatic. The feelings of worthlessness, right? I don't like myself because of all of the shame and things that come along with the traumas and the addictions, right? And so how could I like anyone else, right? So it's definitely, there's a mindset that justifies all of these actions, right? And it's that mindset that you have to change, and you can't change that mindset until you're out of the situation. And so it becomes a never-ending cycle of how do you get out of that situation, right? So that's why I say it's unfortunate that I got multiple sclerosis, but it saved my life.
Turned your life around.
It broke that situation, right? It gave other people a reason to be compassionate towards me enough that gave me the ability to break the situation. They gave me the ability to get out of the situation and change my trajectory.
So this MS actually allowed other people to have sympathy and compassion for you, and then you felt that love, so you started loving yourself?
Yes. It allowed me to feel like I was worthy of the help that is being offered. Even though help's offered, if you don't feel worthy of that help, you're not going to accept it. Okay. Then there's the pride, right? Of, why should I have to accept that help? And then you have to admit that you have all of these problems, right?
Mm.
And that's what you've been dodging for 10 years, right?
Oh, yeah. It's a hell of a path that you've had to find your way on.
Well, we find our way through life.
Mm-hmm.
Life is a story, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's life is a story.
Was it your grandmother's book they were showing the other day?
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. My grandmother, okay, so like I said, I come from a very old family in North Bay. E.T. Carmichael is my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
E.T. Carmichael School, Ethel Thomas. He was my grandfather. His wife, May, when she was born in 1900. And when she was 1907, they immigrated from Scotland over to Canada here and ended up here in North Bay. And married my grandfather and is the matriarch of our family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when she was in her late 70s and 80s, she had decided to write down some memoirs of her life, growing up here in North Bay in this area, what it was like to be the child of a pioneer family, growing up, what North Bay, what the traveling from Scotland to Canada was like, what North Bay was like, what the community was like,
Mm-hmm.
right? And she wrote them she wrote 2 books, and she wrote them in such a way that they're anecdotal stories, written in very plain English, for children. And they're just like your grandmother. If you can picture an old-fashioned granny sitting, telling stories of her childhood to all the children on the floor around her rocking chair. That's exactly what these books are like. They're verbatim. And it's very interesting because the things that she mentions, the places she mentions, there are still places here in North Bay. I walk by them every day. So there's that connection over time, right? And then to think how many generations of my family have grown up reading her words, right? Knowing her story, right? And the connection that creates in our family and in our extended family as well, right?
What are you going to do with those?
Well, right now I'm not a technologically sound person, so I'm an artist, so I'm not organized or computer savvy. So right now I'm scanning them very slowly. As I read through them, I scan them, I'm digitizing them, and then that way I can share them with our larger extended family. The Carmichaels have a worldwide network
Mm-hmm.
of family. We still have lands in Scotland, and there's a Baron of Carmichael and
Cool.
all of that, right? So, yeah, there's 45,000 members worldwide.
That's right on.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that project goes forward and you can share them with as many people as possible, really.
Well, yes, that's one of my thoughts is I would like to find, a local publication that would be willing to print them. This is the idea of digitizing them. That way I can share them about easier. And
I know we talked about possibly doing something in the magazine, and I'd like to
Right.
continue with that
Right, yeah.
conversation because it didn't work out for this spring, but it'd be an excellent series of
Right.
things that could be put in my magazine back in the
Right.
Bay. I'm sure it would be well received for sure.
Oh, I'm sure. It's interesting to hear words echoed from 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Even though they were written in the 70s, but these are her accounts of growing up here at the turn of the last century. and you know, and up into her young adulthood and that in the 20s, and
Hmm.
so it's a very interesting read.
How old are you, Mark?
I'm 51.
51, eh? So when did the MS diagnosis come?
In 2000.
All right.
So
So
I was-
for the past 23 years, you've been on this side of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you have you're involved with a gallery downtown?
Yes. Gateway to the Arts.
Mm-hmm.
Carrie Ems. She is a phenom. She is the one that does all the organizing and all that kind of stuff, right? I paint.
Right.
That's what I'm good at. I paint,
Yeah.
and I like to talk to people.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here today. I like to talk to people, and I like to help people.
You have a project fundraiser that you guys are in the midst of planning and hoping to do that's involves teams of painters. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so well, let me just backtrack and work up to there first, because
Sure.
this has been a 15-year journey, really, of painting.
Mm-hmm.
So as I was saying before, they started to build up around the house, the paintings, right?
Right.
And you can only give so many away, and if you're an unknown artist, they're not worth the canvas they're painted on. Really, you can buy blank canvas for more than you can sell a painting for, right? And you can only give so many away to your neighbors and your friends and all of that, right? And they still build up, because if you're painting every day, they build up, right? So I thought, well, how can I give back to my community that I feel I've wronged, right? Coming from an old family, there's some civic pride, right? There's a school named after my grandfather. There's a church named after my family. And here I am bouncing in and out of jail and dealing drugs and ruining people's lives, right? Never mind the petty crime, the ruining people's lives.
Part of
Right.
the problem.
Absolutely part of the problem. And now that I was no longer part of that problem, I still felt I owed some perhaps form of penance, right? So I thought, well, what can I do, right? I'm a nobody. What can I do, right? So I created the Create to Donate project. And it was a personal commitment to donate at least 100 of my original paintings to local fundraisers and charities, in hopes of, now, secretly paying penance to my community, but publicly in hopes of inspiring other people to think creatively about how they can donate their special talent to their community. We all have something we're good at, right? For me, it's painting, right? And I'm not even sure if I'm all that good at it, but some people seem to
Well,
like them. So,
I believe you are. I know your strokes.
you know,
Proud to have one of your paintings.
it's expression, and no expression is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, if it brings joy, then great. If it brings joy to me while I'm doing it, great. If it takes me out of that discomfort time, then great, right? And if it helps or brings joy to somebody else, then even better, right? So it started out as a Create to Donate project, the 100 painting commitment. How can I inspire other people to think creatively about how they help their communities? If you have carpentry skills, donate some time to Habitat for Humanity. Go help your neighbor. It doesn't have to be organized, right? Some people call them random acts of kindness, but that's just being community, right? And this is the community that I grew up with, right? These are people that I went to high school with, that I know their families. And these are the people I wronged. And this is the community that's supposed to be helping them, right? And this is the community that helped me, even though I had done them wrong, right? So once that was done, I was successful with my 100 paintings. Once that was done, then it was, well, you know, my kids want something to remember me by. I can't give every single painting away, right? What else can I do instead, right? So I thought of the Community Excellence Award, and really, I was living in Mattawa at the time, and the Create to Donate, I had finished that commitment, and I thought, you know, what else can I do? And I was sitting thinking, what else can I do? What, right? There's only so many organizations that you can support. There's only so many charities that have fundraisers, that have, right, that I can actually support with what I'm doing the way I'm doing it. So I thought, well, here's this woman, Chanel, who I had met in Mattawa, and online, on Facebook, and I was gobsmacked that in the middle of winter, she was opening up her house and making coffee and sandwiches for the seniors, but anybody, because she was halfway between the hospital and the senior complex, right? So the seniors walking, they could stop at her house and warm up and have a friendly conversation, and a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, a sandwich. And she had no expectation from the community about this. She was doing this all out of her own pocket just because she's seen a need for the community and stepped up, right? So I thought, well, I'm going to honor her by offering her one of my paintings, right? And she was quite thrilled to get a painting and be recognized and all of that. And I thought, well, this is what I'll do now. So I created the Community Excellence Award, is what I named it. And I decided that once a year, I'll take nominations. That year I had picked it. That was my inspiration. But I had decided that every year I'll take nominations from the community. I have a fairly active online presence. So I'll take nominations from the community who they want to see honored, right? A volunteer, somebody in the community that's making a difference for their community, that's just completely selfless, right? So the nominations roll in, and then every year I pick through them, a little backstory about what they do and blah, blah, blah. And it really goes on what they do and how many votes they get. Some people are just resounding. 20 or 30 people will nominate them. And, well, I guess the community is picked this year, right? So yeah, that's...
And this is your 9th year?
Yes, this is my 9th year, yeah.
And who are you honoring this year?
Tracy Clement. When I put it up last month that I was going to be donating, it's time to take nominations again. This year's theme is fireflies. And those are the people that light up our community, light up the darkness, right? Like a firefly. One firefly in a room isn't going to light up much, but you put 1,000 of them and the whole forest is alight, right?
Well, an interesting thing with that, because yes, a firefly creates other fireflies to light up. That's
Right.
a signal. So when you have more than one and one is shining, and
Right.
then everybody else will want to shine.
Right, exactly. So this is the whole idea as well behind the Community Excellence Award, is to try and honor people and to encourage others about thinking about how they can, again, the same as the create to donate, how can they donate their own time, and it doesn't have to cost anything. Like, there's a lot of things we can do for our neighbors, we can do for our friends, we can do for total strangers. You're doing it for yourself, right? You're doing it so you can hold your head up high, right? You're doing it because you've been in that situation and wish somebody would help you. You're doing it, whatever your motivation is.
Empathy, compassion.
Whatever the motivation is, you're doing it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that should be honored and recognized. And those stories told, we're all stories, right? If we don't recognize each other's story, if we don't express our story to be recognized, right, then how are we a community?
What makes Tracy a worthy recipient?
Her work with the homeless. She does a lot of outreach work with boots on the ground. She started her own outreach. What is it called? Hearts and Hands, I believe is the name of that one. But again, if you follow any of these outreach groups on Facebook, on social media, you'll always see Tracy is the one that's going to check on people when somebody needs checked on. Someone needs somebody that sees somebody that has no shoes or might be in a bad way. 9 times out of 10, you see Tracy's name pop up saying, "Oh, I swung by and checked on them. I dropped them off a care package. I made sure they had a coffee." Right? And it's that sort of selfless work, right? That's selfless work. That's nobody's paying for that. That's coming out of her pocket. That's because she cares. She's not getting paid to do this. This isn't an obligation. It's a self-professed obligation.
Mm-hmm.
It's an obligation that she's decided to take upon herself because she sees a need in her community and wants to be community, right? So that's why she deserves this year's.
Oh, that's
accolades.
excellent.
Last year's, it was Lori Burns and Cindy D'Agostino
Right.
for their organizing the VEST project
Mm-hmm.
and the help that's going to Ukraine. And the year before that, it was Harriet Madigan for her work with Clean, Green, Beautiful North Bay and Earth Nest.
Yeah.
That's another one.
There's a lot of people in North Bay that deserves some recognition,
Right.
because they make this city go around, and they do all the small sort of dirty jobs that.
Right. So normally they get, and they don't want any recognition, or for the most part, they don't want to. Everybody wants to be recognized for the good that they do in a community, right? And
Well, a lot of them, even the ones that are shy about it, they go through it because they know the recognition helps the cause that they're trying to help.
well, absolutely, and
So they
there's that
sacrifice a bit of
aspect.
their private life.
There's that aspect to it as well. Living on disability, I get no money to live on. It just covers the bills. It just covers the bills and allows me to paint. So how am I to donate to any of these causes? How am I to support them, right? Unless it's with my paintings.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And there's an exponential growth now because of it. Now, if I was to donate the base cost of a canvas and a little bit of paint that it takes to cover it, it's a donation, but it's a small donation, right? But if I donate that painting because I've applied my talent to it, if I donate that painting, then it can be auctioned off for a lot more than the base cost, right? And that makes it a worthy, substantial donation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about homelessness for a second, because I know
Okay, sure.
this morning there was an announcement outside at the Low Barrier Shelter
Okay.
up on Chippewa. MPP Vic Fideli was there making the announcement. I had heard about it from Councillor King, who's involved with DSAB. So, but I don't know what the announcement is. But what do you know about the Low Barrier Shelter and that system, and what the city is trying to do? Do you think there's things that are working, or are there things that they could do better?
That's a bandage situation right now.
Mm-hmm.
The low barrier shelter is a bandage situation.
Bandage, yeah.
For the size of a crisis that national homelessness is, the small bandage fixes of low barrier shelters or shelters, that's all it is. It's a bandage. It's not a permanent solution, right? People need a permanent solution. And now the demographic of homeless people is not the same as it was when I was homeless. Okay. I was homeless because who's going to rent to a drug addict that's got no money?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, there are a lot of people who are ordinary, normal people. They might be low income, and they get put into these situations where, case in point, I have family members right now that are experiencing hidden homelessness, okay, where through no fault of their own, they were paying their rent on time, like good tenants, had always been good tenants. And then the landlord sold the building, and the new landlord wanted to do renovations. So they got evicted. And even though there's a promise to return, you get the right of refusal, first right of refusal on return, right? After 4 months of, okay, well, this should only take 3 or 4 months to do the renovations and you can move right back in. Okay, they can go and their child can go and stay at family members for a few months, right? But after that few months, then they get contacted and say, oh, there was problems with the renovations can't go forward. You won't be able to move back in.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're left.
Reno evicted. Yeah,
Reno evicted.
Yeah.
Okay. But they're also left with, now they're disabled as well, and they have a child.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They don't receive enough from disability to pay rent anywhere.
Yeah. All the support systems aren't geared to the current economic markets.
Right. So
what do you think a permanent solution would be?
So then what? They put their name in for government subsidized housing and go on to a wait list. And that's been a year and a half now. That they're still essentially homeless. Everything they own is in bins. And they're living at family members, sleeping on the couch. And that's not right. You know, a country is a society, a community is judged by how they take care of the less fortunate, how they take care of the vulnerable members of their society, of their community. And we're failing, horribly failing.
With the deficit of subsidized supported housing?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So
There-
that do you
there
feel
are
that that's
ways-
the
there-
key to the solution?
Yes. I think there would be some ways that the government could help by allowing, say, other landlords to register as geared to income rental units, where it's not just the government housing, but actual private landlords for market value apartments, right? If they were able to, never mind the geared to income subsidy for the property, it should be a guaranteed subsidy for the individual, right? And I believe that disability should be tied into the rate of inflation, right? What people were receiving in the 90s on disability, or the early 2000s even on disability, is the same thing that they're receiving now, even though our dollar's worth, a lot less.
What percentage of the people that are facing housing challenges would be disability oriented, do you think?
A good number,
Yeah.
a large percentage.
So just like for one segment of it is for the people that are receiving benefits because of disability, which is, I know there's hoops to go through and it's pretty well certified. It's not as easy as people think
No, absolutely not.
to get on that. And so that's one way of helping a big chunk of the problem is people facing these challenges is disability supports don't keep up with market rate.
Well, absolutely. And they don't keep up with inflation, which means that they don't keep up with food prices.
Mm-hmm.
They don't keep up with anything. Okay, so then you get desperation playing in. Okay. And desperation will lead good people to do crime, to do things, to feed themselves, to feed whatever. And that desperation leads to this whole perpetuating cycle of trauma, of shame, of self-loathing, right?
Yeah, you're in the toilet bowl once you start going around and around that, right?
Right.
You're just going to go
Okay.
down.
So then how do you get out?
Yeah.
Right?
You need stabilization.
You have to have a stable environment.
Yeah.
What saved my life? Well, getting sick and getting that stable environment.
I think that's the theory behind the low barrier shelter is to get people into a situation that's a little bit less destabilized, and
But
then
it's
have a
not.
No, I don't.
It's not, though. You get a place to stay for the night.
Yeah.
You get a bed to lay down on.
But the next phase of what they have there is if for the people that they feel like who want to try to move on up, I think there's a second phase to that. You're right. Low barrier is just shelter. Get out in the morning.
Sure, there is. Okay.
But I think they're trying to use that as part of a system.
Okay. If it's used as a stepping stone into recovery programs, great. Okay. But again, one system is not supporting the other. Okay.
Yeah.
What are the wait times to get into any sort of recovery program?
Yeah, that's the other part of the problem, right?
So you have these people who are stuck in this perpetual cycle who, even if they want out, they don't know how to get out. If they knew how to get out, they would get out.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to be a drug addict. Nobody wants to be a criminal. they are left feeling at that particular moment that is their only. We don't choose to make bad decisions. We make bad decisions because at that time we thought it was a good decision. We thought this was the only decision we could make.
Well, supports for mental health and for those who've been traumatized and whatnot are key, right?
Right,
Because they're not going to be
absolutely.
able to do anything until they have that dealt
Absolutely.
with, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to deal with one problem until they deal with the other. And the very first problem they have to deal with is stability, is homelessness,
Yeah.
is having a permanent place. Okay. There's a pride of residency. Okay. Even for poor people, even for homeless people, even for drug addicts, even for mentally ill people, it's still their house. It's their room. It's their private place where they can feel however they want to feel, right? And in these shelters, you don't have that privacy. You don't have that level of stability. And it takes that level of stability to even start to even contemplate how to overcome any of these other problems, right?
Well, if housing is out of reach for two working people who have no disabilities and are able to have options, then
Right.
that's a huge chasm for somebody that has to rebuild themselves, their lives, and just start over again, right?
Right,
So
absolutely.
if
So
yeah,
if they end up with there are barriers to reclaiming your life when you get into those situations, because if you end up with a criminal record,
mhm,
well,
yeah,
who's going to want to hire you, right? You'll never get a police check again, so nobody's going to hire you, right? Um, and that perpetuates the situation.
yeah. There's more
Uh,
hurdles. There's
there,
lots of hurdles in the way of people when they get to that point, right?
right, and it becomes an insurmountable, right?
So that's why we need better upstream stuff, so that people that are traumatized they have that support even in their teens,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
It's just so that they don't get to the point where it's irreversible or
Right. Now,
harder.
public acceptance about mental illness,
Hmm.
public acceptance about trauma, uh, and the things that cause childhood traumas, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's drinking, whether it's drugs, whether it's abusive situations of every stripe,
Hmm.
right? Um, public acceptance of a conversation around those things, okay? Uh, if we can have conversations, actual conversations like you and I sitting here right now, I can tell you all about doing drugs. I can tell you all about crime. I can tell you all those kind of horror stories, right? And you'll sit there with an open mind and listen to it and go, that's very interesting. And you'll have your own contemplations, right? And we can have a conversation, right? But for a long time, and it's really just in the last, say, decade, that we've been able to openly have those conversations. Until then, everything was privated, everything was secreted away. We were told as young men to stifle it,
Hmm.
to suppress all of that, to not talk about it, to suck it up, right? And that's not the right view, right?
We've covered some interesting ground. We don't have much more time,
Okay.
and I think we'll end up having another conversation. Let's just
Oh,
continue
yeah.
it down the road.
Yeah, I love talking. So
Yeah, no, this is good because when we reveal some of the challenges, we also reveal some of the solutions, and
absolutely.
we begin to realize it's very nuanced, and there's a lot of different parts and pieces to it. But there, you got to support people before they get too far down the rung, and they got to help people up the rung
Absolutely.
in phased ways, right?
If I'd had a social worker who cared when I was younger,
Hmm.
that I felt I could have an open conversation with, I guarantee the trajectory of my life would have been vastly different. Vastly different, right? For example, I have a grade 9 formal education. I got my GED when I was in jail, right? I took a personal support worker course to help look after my aunt and uncle, but that was years later. And yet, I'm an articulate person. I have a mind. I have thoughts. I have feelings. But if you'd seen me in the 90s, you wouldn't have given me the time of day. But somebody did. And because they did, here I am now. Right? If that intervention had happened earlier in my life, what trajectory would have it? Right?
For sure.
So these open conversations, right? The ability to have open conversations and the encouragement of having people have compassion and compassion towards their community. These are all the fundamentals of healing our community and the people in it.
That's an excellent note to end this session on.
Okay.
I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk.
Yeah, thank you.